Let's wait for a moment until people come in. Now, I realize we are all hungry and we want lunch, and as Henry VIII said to his wives, I won't keep you for very long. I'll try to focus on what I believe to be the mother of all strategic questions, namely the question of resilience. But I'm very delighted that yesterday General Golan gave us the operational perspective of it. And I want to deal with some principal problems, not to focus necessarily on Israel. Israel will be mentioned because it's a very special case, but I think it's important to look at the broader picture. And the reason why I say that it is the mother of all strategic issues is because we have all four major components that we must consider when we speak about national resilience. First of all, there is a very wide variety of issues that you need to bring in if you want to understand if resilience is working or not. What do you need to do so that the population will be more resilient? Second, because it is tremendously difficult, particularly difficult, to find the center of gravity, to say, okay, we have 42 issues. Which are the two, the three most important, so that all the others can be compromised, but on these two or three issues we must focus. Like in every strategic thinking, you must constantly be aware of if the solution of today is also good for tomorrow, among other things, because the solution of today, if it worked, changed the problem, so that you need to find a different solution while you fell in love with the fact that you had the good solution yesterday and you want to continue to succeed. No, now your effect on the reality has changed and you must adjust yourself to it. And of course, the last and very important thing is the long range. The question of resilience doesn't work in a few months or even a few years. The question is, when you have a very long conflict, when you have very deep difficulties, how does it work over a long period of time? And let me emphasize right from the very beginning that most of the examples we bring about national resilience have to do with wars and confrontations. But if you take other things that are not even associated with wars, it is even more important. Let me give you two examples. One historical one, take the Big Depression in the United States. If you have studied the Big Depression, this was an enormous trauma to the American people, and the ability to overcome it and the ability to become the greatest nations on earth in spite of what happened in the Great Depression is one very example of the positive element of having national resilience. I'm sorry to say the Europeans show us the negative element. Exactly 100 years ago, we had the Great War. I don't think the Europeans have recuperated from the First World War yet. A lot of what we see today in Europe, and if I want to use the ultimate example of it, nie wieder Krieg, as if war is the worst possible thing there is. It's very bad, but it's not the worst. So here is a negative example. And if I want another negative example, I'm again coming directly to Europe. Look at the attitude that the Europeans have presented vis-à-vis the immigration problem, and I don't think resilience is the best way to describe the outcome of what we've seen since the summer of 2015. So we're speaking of something that is tremendously important beyond the issues of war, although war is a very extreme case, and the question, how do you deal with the consequences of war, is tremendously important. We also need to understand that it's not only our resilience that we need to study, but also the resilience of societies that are very different from us. And there are different dangers with different societies. In Western societies, one of the most important dangers is the loss of self-confidence. People lose confidence in themselves. And again, Europe comes to mind. When we are speaking about third world societies, we very often find that radical policies and unreasonable actions and rigidity are very often the product of nations who have an inferiority complex about themselves. And this was a product of some trauma. Some would say colonialism produced it. Others would speak about other things. But again, different societies respond differently. When you speak about non-democratic societies, even technically developed but non-democratic societies, you will find, and I think Russia is a good example for that, where you don't focus on the constructive element of building your society, but you're focusing on something that gives you back the glory of the past, and you want to get the support of the population because you promised them something to be proud of. And I think that this also can have a distortion about the ability of a society to sustain these difficulties over a long period of time. And let us also remind ourselves that there are two kinds of resilience. One that I think is tremendously positive, and the other one that is perhaps better than falling apart, but not much better. You can be resilient like cockroaches are resilient. I believe they've been resilient for millions of years, and they tell me that if a nuclear war comes, the only thing that will remain will be cockroaches. Maybe. The question is, do we want to be cockroaches? So the question of resilience is not only hang on there and survive, but also what do you do with your survival? And here the constructive element comes in. Are you strong enough not only to survive, but to continue the building process, the constructive process of the society? Let me give you an example from the Jewish people. Jews could have come after the Holocaust and say, we are the ultimate victims, what has been done to us has never been done to any other people, so now we have a full position as victims. We are, this victimhood is what we make a living. And the State of Israel and Zionism is the answer to the Holocaust in a very substantial way, saying we are going to build something. This is our response to our mishap. So even if analytically you don't agree with me, at least subjectively, this was the motivation. And I'm always bored by objectivity. I think it's the most boring thing there is. If you want to understand human behavior, you have to ask, what do people think about themselves? What motivates them? And the question if it is true or untrue is secondary. I think that even if you disagree with the analysis, you will agree that this is what Israelis, what Jews after the Second World War had in mind. I heard it personally from the people who fathered Israel. And the question is, how do you build, how do you maintain resilience in a democratic society where you cannot use force? I mean, you can build resilience in North Korea or in Stalin's Russia because you get re-educated, and after a while you come to the conclusion that it pays to be resilient because otherwise you will not be, or you will be resilient in a place that has minus 20 centigrade below, and it is a bit uncomfortable. So I'm not speaking about where you can work with indoctrination or with force. What happens when you have to convince people to go on in spite of very, very difficult circumstances? And let me give you a few points, and I'm sure that this is not exhausting all the elements, but this is what I think is the most outstanding. First of all, you have to give people the feeling that what they're doing, including their suffering, has a meaning. And when you know that, okay, it's difficult, but what I'm doing has a meaning, at least to me, but also to others. It's nice to be respected by the others, but the most important is, what do you think about yourself? And I'm not speaking about the individual. It has to do with solidarity. It has to do with a group of people who feel that beyond the individual difficulties, there is something greater than the difficulties. And here again, I must say something negative about Europe, because the only functioning solidarity structure is the national solidarity structure. So if you try to abolish or to delegitimize or to belittle the national association of people because you are fighting the yesterday's war, you are saying every nationalism must on the slippery slope end up as fascism, and then you want to be post-national, as people in Europe very often are, the result is very often that people look for their solidarity group in the sub-national field. Ask the Scots, for instance. Ask people in Barcelona. Ask people all over Europe that when the national structure is not functioning and delegitimized, then they go back to sub-national things. So the national solidarity is functioning. The supranational solidarity, and if you have a developed sense of humor, the universal solidarity of men and women all over the world, and you know, if you try to be supranational, you can be like the beginning of a manifesto that we all know very well. Arbeiter, alle Länder, vereinigt euch, and so on. Okay? There is no class solidarity. There is no such thing. Although the people who propagated it were the greatest innovators in terms of creative writers. They could work for commercials. I still remember the best placard that I've ever seen shows a soldier charging with a rifle and a bayonet, and the bottom said, a bayonet is a weapon with a worker at each end. Is it brilliant? Yes. Is it complete lunacy? Yes. There is only national solidarity. There is also family solidarity, tribal solidarity, but this supernatural, universal, this is for people with a developed sense of humor. The second thing is, if you're in struggle, you must at least have the mainstream believe that your side has justice on its side. Okay? Now, it must not be that you're always perfect. You may make mistakes, you may even commit crimes, but basically, justice is on my side. Believing it, again, if it's true or not true, is a different story. The next thing is that you must believe that at least in the long run, cumulatively, time is working for me. Yes, it's difficult today, but it will be easier tomorrow and even easier, more easy later. And in the final analysis, we will get what we want. Tremendously important. The next thing is that people should have a good life. But good life is something that is very subjective. And again, I come to the domain I feel most comfortable with, subjective issues. Some people may think they have a good life, even if looking at them from the outside, it looks very different. The question is not if somebody in a European newspaper or an American liberal newspaper will write that this is doomed. If the people themselves believe that their life is good, let me give you an example of Israel because it is fascinating. In Israel, we have all our public opinion polls are with 508 people because the statisticians say that you can represent all sides of the Israeli society with 508 people. But once a year, we have a very big public opinion poll by the Statistics Bureau, and there 45,000 people are asked a number of questions. And two questions are particularly interesting. One of the questions is, what do you think of Israel? And the second is, how do you feel? What do you think of Israel? You get the Jewish answer. I don't know if you've been told this, Jews have a very deep defect. A Jew cannot feel good unless he feels bad. It's in us. There's no other way of explaining it. So when they ask them, how is Israel? The answer is, oh, it's terrible. Nothing functions. Everybody is an idiot. Nothing is the way it should be, and so on. And then the next question is, how is your life? And they say, great. And they say it's never been better. And they say next year it will be even better than today. Now they may be wrong, but it doesn't matter. They feel there is something called, I think, the International Happiness Scale. We are number 11 on the Israeli happiness scale, before the Germans, before the Austrians, before the French, the British, the Americans. The ones above us are Scandinavians. It's too cold there. They don't understand what they're saying anyhow. And you constantly go from one war to another. Okay? The question in Israel is not, will there be a war, but will it be in 2 weeks or in 2 months or in 2 years? Will it be in the north? Will it be in the south? Will it be both in the south and in the north? And people know it's not only my generation. I served in the army, my children will serve in the army, my grandchildren will serve in the army. So objectively speaking, you may look at it and say, wow, this is terrible. But I don't care, because the Israelis say, we like it. And a very large number of us, myself included, have a European passport, an American passport. We speak the languages. We are wanted around the world. No problem whatsoever. We can make 5 times what we make in Israel. And yet, Israel is the second lowest on the scale among all OECD countries of people who leave the country. So something keeps the Israelis in Israel, not because they're great patriots, but because they say life is good. And even if they're wrong, it doesn't really matter. Because the question here is one of perception. Now, another thing is that you need to think that if something happens, we know what to do. And that's a very important, I believe General Golan mentioned it yesterday on the operational level. The systems in Israel don't work well, because systems don't work well. But basically, Israelis know what to do. And they know that around them there is an environment where other people know what to do. And even if they don't know what to do, it will take them 5 minutes and then they will know what to do. So, for instance, I would feel much less comfortable in Europe vis-à-vis terrorism than in Israel, in spite of the fact that the level of terrorism is immeasurably higher, because in Israel I know what to do. Here I would have to pray. In Israel I can shoot the person who comes at me with a knife, so I know what to do, and it's usually very effective. But you don't have to be armed. There are many other things that you can do. Israelis know what to do about difficulties that we are facing. You also, and here is again something that is difficult to explain to Europeans, there is a kind of Genugtuung, I think. Schadensfreude, Genugtuung, and so on. These are terms I prefer to use in German. They feel much better when the enemy suffers. Because being nice is not something that, encourages people. When you ask people in very difficult situations, how do you cope with it? You very often get the answer, I can cope with it longer, as long as the other side pays a very heavy price. It may not sound good, but usually what is true doesn't sound good. So here is another example of this case. Last but not least, I think that it is very important to come back to the issue of solidarity. If you say we, and the we is usually a national one, it can also be something else, but the most common solidarity group is a national one. We have an enemy that is outside. It is not a civil war. It is not a war between brothers. I don't know how resilient I would be in the American Civil War or in civil wars that you had here in Europe, okay? the feeling that we are against them and we know what to do and our life is basically okay and we are on the right side and in the final analysis we will win, this cluster brings the resilience, I think, to a level where it can be very helpful. Let me now focus on two cases. And I'm focusing on Israel and Europe, not because I'm an Israeli and this is in Europe, but because I think that if you take two democratic, open societies and compare them, Israel is a very distinct case among democratic societies, and Europe is where you have most democratic societies, so I think this is analytically the most helpful to go for. Let's take the Israeli case. First of all, beware. Israel is in war for 140 years. The state of Israel only exists for 70 years, but the Jewish community in this part of the world, in terms of having to face hostility from the Arab side, is there for 140 years, and they have never had any other experience than hostility in this region. And even the behavior, when you look at what Palestinians do to Jews 100 years ago, 80 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 2 days ago, and tomorrow, nothing changed. The only thing that changed are the excuses. Basically, you see a Jew, you stab him, and the moment you stab him, you become a hero. The moment you stab him, you go to heaven. The moment you stab him, you become a hero to your children, to your society, and you get paid for the rest of your life, or your family gets paid much more than anybody else. In terms of a business, it's the best thing to do. If you will kill a Jew, you will be rewarded on a level that depends how many Israelis you have killed, and if you're an Arab Israeli citizen, you will be paid more because it means that you took more of a risk by doing so. So this has changed very, very little. And let me give you the position where Israelis had the challenge. This is what is wrongly called the Second Intifada. It was in the beginning of the 2000s, after the Camp David summit failed, and the focus was on the years 2002 and 2004. In a very short period, Israel had 1,200 people killed and 16,000 wounded. Now, if you compare it per capita, because the population of Israel at the time was 5 million, and the Jewish population in Israel was 5 million, and Europe was about 500 million. So imagine these numbers multiplied by 100. Namely, we're speaking about I think, not 12 million, 1.2 million dead in Europe, okay, and 16 million wounded. Imagine what would have happened to European society if you had this level of casualties. At the same time, when people had 2 children at the same school, they would send them in different buses because Palestinians would put bombs in buses. So the idea was, if one bus goes in the air and I lose one child, at least I haven't lost both my children. So it was a terrible time in Israel. Was it difficult? Yes, but the Israelis knew what to do. They knew what to do, so they took measures. By the way, the Europeans opposed it. And if Israel doesn't take a measure that the Europeans oppose, we must have made a mistake, and then we reconsider it and we try to find something that the Europeans will oppose, because then there is a chance that it will work. And the Israelis brought down the casualties, brought down terrorism by 98%. Did it solve the problem? No, problems don't get solved, but it brought it from an unacceptable level to a very, very, very low level that you can live with for a very long period of time, much less than the level of regular crime. We're speaking of something that you can live in with very long. Consider the fact that today in Israel, you're being threatened by Iranian missiles in the hand of Hezbollah, and we're speaking about 130,000 missiles. Now, you heard yesterday from General Golan the difficulties of it and the answers and the very bright technological solutions, but these solutions are really only making the problem a little smaller. When you speak about 150,000 rockets and missiles, no matter how good your interceptors are, there is a limit to a number of interceptors that you can have, and there is a limit to the success, and although the success is far beyond what we expected, nevertheless, you will get hundreds of missiles with heavy payloads in Tel Aviv, and you know it will hit. When the Iraqis were shooting on Tel Aviv in '91, I had 500 meters of each side of my home, I had 2 missiles. And actually I was very insulted because in these parts of Tel Aviv it's very difficult to find parking, and the Iraqis just came now and immediately found parking in the middle of Tel Aviv. The missiles were really much more fortunate than I am when I take my car. But after a short period of time, okay, 39 missiles. It is somewhat unpleasant. The Israelis shook off the dust from their sleeves and went to work, and the Israeli economy and the Israeli society is flourishing again. The most important element, and here I want to juxtapose it with what is happening in Europe, the most important point is that unlike what is happening now in Europe, and in my mind this is the most dangerous thing that is happening now in Europe, namely a polarization of the society. In Israel, you have about 70% of the Israeli population in the middle of the political spectrum. This makes resilience far more possible than anything else. And that is tremendously important. Look at Europe. I'm not speaking of the fact that Europe doesn't have a terrorist problem to speak of. I mean, in comparison to Israel, it's a joke. I'm delighted it's a joke. I hope it will be even lower. It's not as if I want, to have an equal amount of casualties or of terrorist actions here. Speaking of terrorism, this is too warm. But look at the Israeli attitude to immigration and the European. Israel is a society of immigrations, where ideologically we call ourselves Jews, but we had very little to do, Oriental Jews with European Jews. Very little. Even in Europe, there were different communities, but they were somehow associated. But you take Jews from the Middle East and you take Jews from Europe, they were profoundly different. They had a myth about a history 3,000 years ago, but they had very little, because remember, Israel was established by secular people. So religion doesn't really bring people together. When I hear the word religion, immediately a shiver goes down my spine. So the people who built Israel were secular. So it's not the religion that was there. And we are a nation of immigrants like you've never had them. And believe me, we were not kind to our immigrants, and they were not kind to us, and this is the Israeli experience. It was a lot of fun. Everybody was cursing everybody else, everybody was belittling everybody else, and our population tripled in the beginning of the establishment of the State of Israel, in the late 40s, early 50s, and only relatively recently, 25 years ago, we suddenly got into a population of, I believe we were 4 million at the time, we got 1.2 million Russians. So we're speaking about a nation of immigration with a lot of tensions, but look at Israel 70 years later, or 50 years later, 30 years later, depending on the wave of immigration, there is hardly an Israeli family today that is not mixed. And the way we treated it, not because the government had a policy. In Israel, nobody trusts the government. Nobody even knows that there is a government. Nobody respects the government. It's not a strategy that somebody wrote down. We have a very simple thing. We have an excuse to have a big army because we are threatened by our enemies. So we take people at the peak of their hormonal action when they're 18, and we bring everybody into the army. And then the military experience of a person like myself when I was very young was not focused on the contribution to security. I was interested in completely other things, and it helped the integration of a number of waves of immigration. So, did immigration create tensions in the society? Yes. Were these tensions, did these tensions affect the political life? Yes, the elections of 1981 were very bad on this level. But with time, this is already integrated into the society, and it made the society stronger and more resilient, because what they have in common is the nationalism, the Israeli Jewish nationalism that brings them together as a system of solidarity. In Europe, look at the way people react to terrorism even when it is very low. I think very often the response is hysteric. They close the town because of a minor act of terrorism. We don't even close the street, okay? It takes a while. Firefighters come with their hoses, they take the blood out of the street, and in a very short time, everything is functioning again. But look at what is happening with immigration. What is happening with immigration is tearing Europe apart. And yesterday we had a conference and they agreed on a paper. We will see how it will work. I mean, I know how it will work. I know how it will not work. I have seen what immigration has done to Europe. In Brexit and in Italy and in Poland and in Hungary, throughout the continent. Of course, Austria is perfect, but all other countries may have problems. And what I'm saying is, this is not a way that a resilient people deals with it, because instead of saying, okay, we may have moved too much in this direction, let's go to the middle, they say, oh, this is terrible, let us go up here. And by the way, in America, we have the same. And the question is, again, what proportion of the population is in the middle of the political spectrum? If we were to go again, and because we are all hungry and we want to have lunch, I will not, over the criteria that I've mentioned before, you will see that Europe has a serious problem. Now, the Europeans have dealt with a more serious problem. Remember, Europe was a slaughterhouse. I still remember, I was young at the time, but I still remember the 30 Years' War. I mean, Europe used to be a slaughterhouse, and today it's a peaceful continent, and there's a lot to learn from Europe. So I'm not saying Europe has failed historically. What I'm saying is the challenge now in Europe that has had such a tremendous success in creating national resilience around the idea of the European project can be done again if people remember that the answer is always in the middle of the political process. When people ask me in Israel, are you right or left? My response is, I belong to the extreme center. And this is something that I very strongly recommend to Europe too. Thank you.
Herr Professor, ich danke Ihnen für den hervorragenden Vortrag, der uns einiges ins Stammbuch schreibt und uns eigentlich auch ein bisschen betroffen zurücklässt. Ich glaube, darüber könnte man vermutlich 3, 4 Nachmittage diskutieren. Das werden wir nicht aufgrund der fortgeschrittenen Zeit. Es wird auch mehr Fragen geben, als wir beantworten können. Ich glaube, der Herr Professor wird unmittelbar nach dem Mittagessen vielleicht auch noch für die eine oder andere Frage zur Verfügung stehen. Ich möchte aber dennoch 3 kurze Fragen, dringende, notwendige Fragen freigeben. Wer möchte?
Really learn much about national, should one say, resilience. Very few do conscription. There is little by way of education. I mean, the army has served that educational purpose that you mentioned in Turkey, in Spain, and in most other countries. So, and schools do not teach national history. In that sense, there's very little emphasis on what are you supposed to defend as a national society? And I don't mean that one should become nationalistic, but it's very true that one doesn't die for, in a way, the EU Commission. As a professor at the Command and Staff College, I did a course in close combat, which is, I think, very interesting and very useful. And when you master some of the, not techniques, but if you have the combat ability, or if you become apathetic in a life-threatening situation, when you know that you can fight and you know something about how to do it, you have a tremendous strength, inner strength. Physical, not so much, but you know what to do, as you emphasized. And I think knowing what the purpose is, what you fight for, and special forces, when they are in close combat, they say, what am I ready to die for? My wife, my children, my community, this is what's on the table here, and then I can fight until death. And this is the close community and the wider community and its values. And if you don't have that, then you have no will to fight. So there's something about the experience in Israel. You are constantly on your toes. We are somewhat on our toes regarding Russia. The Finns are on their toes regarding Russia. The Finns have tremendous national resilience and are reviving the Totalverteidigung concept. So there is something very interesting here that I wish we could study more, or in a way, there's something terribly important in Europe if one is unable to specify to migrants also, if you become a citizen here, we expect you to do this and this. You have to conform to our values, our social contract. We expect this from you. These are your duties, and then you have rights. And there's a sort of complete vacuum regarding all these matters in European society. Maybe we will have to have external shocks in order to at least be reactive. So thank you for your very, very, I think, salient comments.
If I may make a short comment here, I hope that the ultimate test will not come to Europe, because an ultimate test for Europe means a danger to the whole world. But if you show resilience, the chances of aggression are much smaller. And you mentioned the Finns. I think it was heroic what they did vis-à-vis Russia. And unfortunately, the problem is today not only that the Europeans are not willing to exercise it. When Israel exercises it, it is criticized by the Europeans. Now, it doesn't really matter very much because we don't take Europe seriously, but I think it is more dangerous for Europe than it is for Israel. Because we can disregard you, and we do, okay? On the one hand, every value, I mentioned this before, every value that I'm proud of, I've learned from Europe. On the other hand, when you see how the Europeans are willing to undermine the legitimacy of open societies by cooperating with what is happening, for instance, in international organizations, it is something that undermines Europe, because you say these things because you want to have a better position in the UN, but this is also what your children hear from you. And in the final analysis, children will not hear what you tell them, they will look at what you do, okay? I never spoke to my children about a duty for the state or any, they just saw what I did. And they said, I like it. This is something that I respect. This is something that I want to do myself. And when your children look at you and they look at some, I'm not against hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is fun. I'm for it. But even hypocrisy has limits. And certain ways of delegitimizing something that you know is the right thing to do will come to bite you. And educationally speaking, this is what I'm more worried about than anything else. I had a very interesting discussion with Václav Havel. I had him for 3 days just for myself. Okay, I brought him to Israel to get an honorary doctorate at my university, so we had 3 days. He wanted to spend some time. And I told him, wait until the Czechs have 40 years of peace. They will be almost as bad as people in Western Europe. And I hope very much that this will not come true, but this is the danger.
Oberster Osenitz, bitte. Eine kurze Frage, bitte.
So wird es sein. I like very much your statement regarding the Israeli nation building and the solidarity. The secret behind that is for sure the compulsory service for male and for female. In Austria, we are lucky to have still compulsory service for young men, but we do not have for the young women. So do you think it could help Europe to come forward with the integration of young people and to give up the professional army system, which is somehow brought in by NATO, the United States, and somehow nations feel forced to change the system and to give up that service? Thank you.
First of all, I am for a professional army because only a professional army can be indeed professional. So you need a professional army, but first of all, I would bring women into the army for the sake of men. I mean, men come to the army and there are no women. Believe me, I made my own contribution. I have 3 daughters. They've all served in the army, and I hope that many men enjoyed their presence, and I think it's a good idea. The second thing is, if you have general conscription and there are no women, then you can develop a macho society. Oh, we in combat and so on. But when the Israeli special forces guy comes and says, when I was in combat, I did that and that, there's always a woman to tell him, I was there. Okay? Women do something beautiful. They have pins in a room full of balloons, and they just go, pff, you know, and do that. It's very necessary. First of all, it prepares you for marriage, okay, when nobody takes you seriously. And I think it is tremendously important to bring women into the army because you want them to be equal citizens, okay? And you buy a share when you serve your country, and it's a joy. You see, they came to me decades ago and they told me, thank you very much for your military service in the regular period and in the reserve period. Now, with our thanks, go home. I'm still serving in the army because I enjoy it, because it's a privilege to serve my country. And to give this, my daughters felt privileged to be in the army. Why would you deny it to your daughters? I would certainly do it. And also, I think that Europe should invest much more in its armed forces because, look, we're speaking about 1% or even less of GDP. Even the level of 2% is not reached, except I think by Britain, I'm not sure, and the Germans are trying to top it up. We spend between 5 and 6%, but for a long period of time, we spent 23%. Okay, this is sick. Okay, we also had a huge army that was unnecessary. This was a product of the trauma of Yom Kippur. At a certain time, we had a fleet of 4,200 tanks. Okay, a superpower doesn't have it. It's crazy. I'm delighted to say we brought it down. But an army that can really be functional is something that the society should want. And I think that investing more in the army is healthy for the society. The Israeli society contributes to the Israeli army contributes to the Israeli society much more than other institutions. There is a fascinating book, if some of you are interested to read, about Israel. It's called Startup Nation. Why is there so much innovation in Israel? And the sociologist who wrote it went to the army, and they write in their book, Israelis learn pluralism in the army, okay? Army is not what it used to be when the carré was there and people give orders. In democratic societies, armies are something completely different, and they contribute to a society. By the way, in America, I would recommend it so that people stop treating weapons as toys, okay? A weapon is something that you have to have when you don't have a choice. You don't play with it. Once you're through the Israeli army, you don't like weapons. You're stuck with weapons for so long, you don't want to see them again. Okay? This is also a contribution to the society.
Letzte Frage, Herr Rohat, bitte.
My question regards to this innovation comes from the army, and Israel is a high-tech place. With regard to the panel before, superficial intelligence, if it comes to life, is there a discussion in Israeli society to be solidaric, to see cyber or robots as partners, to maybe grant them citizen rights and duties?
First of all, I am always in support of artificial intelligence because there's so little natural intelligence available that perhaps we should produce it. But the Israeli army is very technological, and I think in this sense, the Israeli and the American armies are the only true modern armies in the sense of the incorporation of very sophisticated technology into the operation. But once you go to the army, whenever you have a good idea, they will immediately make it possible for you. There is a system that allows you to take this idea further. And first of all, there is an enormous level of innovation in the army. A lot of the civilian Israeli innovation comes from the military innovations, and Israelis then ask themselves, how can we use something that we built for killing people to actually help people? And there is a huge contribution of Israelis to international medicine, to the point that, you know, a very large portion of innovation in medicine come from Israel. By the way, it made it possible to me to be very rude in a lecture in Oxford. A guy stood up there and said, don't you realize everybody hates Israel so much that very soon the Israeli economy will crumble? And I said to him, sir, I'd like to answer you on two different levels, analytical and personal. Analytically, you know who's financing Israel? You are. Because every time you're buying high-tech technology, you're buying Israeli. You don't even know it. So it works very well. Now on a personal level, you remember the last time you had a colonoscopy? The tiny camera that went up the creek where the sun doesn't shine was Israeli. Would you rather have a Russian massive camera up the same creek? And it gave me the kind of satisfaction that made my day at the time. So Israeli innovation also helps us spiritually to deal with criticism. It gives us a lot of fun. When my daughter ended her military service in a unit called 8200, which is the most sophisticated intelligence unit that uses technology, she wanted to find a job, and she went to a number of high-tech institutions, and they saw her resume, they saw what she did in the army, and they said, come to work tomorrow. And she asked, what will I be doing? And they said, we don't know yet. But with this resume, whatever you do will help us in terms of economic benefits, and she was offered a salary 4 times what her friends were offered that didn't come out of that. So you go to the army, you do something very interesting, you make a major contribution to your country, and you benefit from it when you come out. It's a no-brainer. I mean, it's a win-win-win-win situation, and I think it's very important.
Thank you very much. Lieber Herr Professor, ich darf mich recht herzlich für den Vortrag bedanken. Die letzten Wortmeldungen haben 2 Dinge mir ins Gedächtnis gerufen, wie die Frau Professor Holland-Matlery über die Rolle der Geschichte gesprochen hat. Unsere Autorin Ingeborg Bachmann, die sagt, Geschichte lehrt, aber sie findet keine Schüler. Und zum Zweiten die Rolle der Frauen in der Armee. Wir haben in der Definitionsfindung der Strategie in der ersten Konferenz einen interessanten Ansatz verfolgt, von dem ich zutiefst überzeugt bin, dass langfristig strategisches Denken vermutlich eher eine weibliche Domäne ist, aus sehr vielen Gründen, weil sie in der Regel grundsätzlich konfrontationsvermeidend ist. Das entspricht eigentlich vom biologischen Ansatz nicht dem männlichen Denken. Es wäre also viel logischer, den Mann, was er vermutlich auch über die Geschichte in Generalstäben gezeigt hat, eher in der operativ kurzfristigen, unmittelbaren Bewältigung von Gefahren zu sehen und die langfristig konfrontationsvermeidende, gesellschaftssichernde Funktion, also Strategie, doch eher weiblich konnotiert zu sehen. Ich darf, Herr Professor, für Ihren Vortrag allerherzlichst danken. Wenn die Damen und Herren meine Schlussbemerkungen in der Länge von 3 bis 5 Minuten aus den Plätzen noch erwarten und ausharren können, bräuchten wir den Takt nicht extra anzufügen. Ich darf mich für die Vortragenden, für die Panelleiter, für die Einzelvorträge, für die rege Diskussion, für die Leidensfähigkeit, die Sie hier als Zuhörer bewiesen haben, weil wir mit dem großen Zeitdruck doch sehr viel an Informationen an Sie heranbringen wollten, wirklich beachtenswert ausgeharrt haben, darf ich für mich ein kurzes erstes Resümee ziehen und damit die Konferenz beschließen. Wir verstehen uns als Strategieentwicklungsplattform, das heißt, ein abschließendes Resümee kann es jetzt nicht geben. Der nächste Takt ist, dass die schriftlichen Zusammenfassungen der Panelleiter und Panelisten und Vortragenden bei uns einlangen, dass diese Berichte auch schon die Wortmeldungen der Diskussion beinhalten, damit ein Entwicklungsstand gegenüber dem, was hier zunächst gesagt wurde, dass wir die Berichte zusammenführen, evaluieren, Mehrheitsmeinungen, Dissenting Opinions herausfiltern, um dann eine wissenschaftlich gesicherte, gehaltene Konklusio aus dem hier Gesagten in Komplexo zu bieten. Was für mich als prophylaktische Zusammenfassung herauskommt, wenn ich mich an dieser Idee der Begriffsquadriga orientiere, glaube ich, haben die Vorträge mit Masse gezeigt, dass die Begriffe allesamt auf an und für sich bekannte Phänomene zurückgehen, aber nicht deckungsgleich sein müssen, weil es auch einige Konzepte gibt, die Sinn machen, die wir brauchen, die wir weiterentwickeln müssen und die durchaus in einer unterschiedlichen Gewichtung von Methoden auf Dinge eingehen, die zwar im Prinzip früher vorhanden waren, aber jetzt anders gewichtet sind. Wie zum Beispiel beim Hybrid Warfare Konzept, alle Kriege der Welt seit Sun Tzu waren hybrid. Auch die heutigen sind hybrid. Aber die Breite, das Spektrum der Gefahren, Bedrohungen, Möglichkeiten, Komplexitäten, wie sie heute vorliegen, rechtfertigen natürlich einen neuen Begriff, gleichwohl es kein neues Phänomen ist. Ich glaube also wir können sagen, es sind grundsätzlich Phänomene, die wir kennen. Dort, wo es Konzepte gibt und sie Sinn machen, sie zu begrüßen und der Begriff ist gerechtfertigt, weil er ausdrückt, dass dieses grundsätzlich bekannte Prinzip in einer neuen Ausprägung vorliegt, die einen neuen Begriff verdient. Allerdings, und das ist, was ich mit dem Aufbrechen dieser eingefrorenen Begriffslage erreichen wollte, glaube ich auch dafür sensibilisiert, wo diese Konzepte, diese Prinzipien für eine falsche Zielsetzung verwendet werden. Und diese falsche Zielsetzung beginnt jedenfalls dort, wo Narrative dazu verwendet werden, um die Bedrohlichkeit von offensiven Ansätzen von außen vor der eigenen Bevölkerung kleinzureden. Sie beginnen dort, wo man die eigene Bevölkerung ideologisierend für offensive Ansätze gewinnen will, die völkerrechtlich nicht in Ordnung sind. Sie beginnen auf jeden Fall dort, wo man der eigenen Bevölkerung eine aus den politischen Eliten heraus verzerrte Wahrnehmung der Wirklichkeit verordnet. Und bei Hybrid, und damit möchte ich auch schon enden, wird es noch heikler. Ich glaube, in den Schlussworten des Herrn Professor kommt das auch klar zum Ausdruck. Hybridität in ihrer heutigen Ausprägung verdient diesen neuen Terminus, ist als Konzept notwendig. Wir werden einen vollkommen neuen Mix an Methoden, Verfahren da brauchen, um dem Herr zu werden. Aber diese Argumentation darf in keinem Fall darauf hinauslaufen, dass wir uns dem Irrglauben ergeben, dass das Mischen diskursiver Methoden von Konferenzen, Verhandlungen, Meinungsaustauschen und Ähnlichem dazu führt, dass man die Rolle des Militärs als Ultima Ratio ausblendet und für entbehrlich hält. Das wäre voraussichtlich die katastrophalste Schlussfolgerung aus einem falsch verstandenen Hybriditätsbezug. Aber das ist nur meine vorläufige Zusammenfassung, die durch die Durchsicht aller einlangenden Berichte natürlich overruled werden kann. Ich darf noch einmal für Ihre Bereitschaft, für Ihre Diskussionsfreude, für Ihre Beteiligung, Ihr Engagement danken. Hoffe, dass Sie uns treu bleiben. Im nächsten Jahr wiederkommen. Die Konferenz wird in der gleichen Woche, also in der letzten Juniwoche stattfinden. Sofern der Kommandant des Landesverteidigungsakademie dazu die Zustimmung gibt. Und ich darf Sie nun zum Mittagessen entlassen, eine gute, gesunde Heimreise zu wünschen. Bitte, wenn Ihnen die Konferenz gefallen hat, tragen Sie diese Kunde auch an Interessierte weiter. Wir sind für jeden neuen Zuhörer, Gast, Interessierten, Mitbeteiligten sehr dankbar. Gute Heimreise, Dankeschön.